So there's this joke among the staff that, like, it sounds crazy. Working in a parish office, it's a lot like Seinfeld, like the show Seinfeld, because nothing really ever happens, but what always does happen, like every day, is a little bit of craziness. So, honest to God, like we say, this could be like a sitcom, but people wouldn't believe it, because weird things happen. And people are crazy. And like last summer, the thing that I thought was the most bizarre was, and I don't know if I told you guys this, but during the week, actually for only, I think it was 3 days, some woman, middle-aged woman, would come to the parking lot during the summertime, and you know the little grass in between the parking spaces? She would pull out a blanket and in a bikini start sunbathing. And God bless her, middle-aged, if you're going to pull that off, God bless you. But, like, honest to God, I didn't think my friends would believe me, so I drove by and took a picture. Because nobody's going to believe this. And so the staff were saying, will you get out there and say something to her? Mother of God, I'm not going out there. Like, she could call the cops on me or something. But, like, all I got to say is, wow, there's a lot of craziness. So, like, my favorite line in a country song is, God is great, beer is good, and people are crazy. And if you're going to deal with humanity, you might as well admit it. You know, there's a lot of craziness there. And if you can't at least laugh at it, and at least sometimes even honor it, you'll end up despising humanity. There's this guy at a former parish. I only had 1 year left, and I knew I was going to be transferred. At this other parish, this guy met with me, and he wanted to become a deacon. And the guy was a very good person, very moral, very good, very smart. You know, I honored him for that. But I told him, I said, to be honest, you have a certain smugness towards other people's brokenness. You seem to resent the fact that they didn't make the same decisions that you made. And that sense of superiority, until you get rid of it, I wouldn't recommend you for a deacon. Honestly, I don't know who would make a good deacon or a bad deacon. I have to admit that. But if you already have a certain smugness towards the broken and the bruised, you shouldn't become a deacon. And I don't think he ever did. I'm not really quite sure, but I don't know really what happened to him. I didn't mean to put him down, but I am serious that if you can't at least love people for their craziness or brokenness, you're going to end up despising people. And like where people are broken, not the craziness, but where people are broken, I know this sounds strange, where they're broken, that's where you find really the divine. So we had this funeral for this woman named Sally. She was a good woman. She actually had moved to California but wanted to have her funeral here. And Sally was a very good woman, had a great life. But the one scar in her life was when she was a little kid, she was put up for adoption. And she remembered when that huge door slammed. And forever after that, even as an elderly woman, she was always afraid of being abandoned. So that was kind of her brokenness, but that's also where the divine was, because she was so kind of traumatized about abandonment. She really doubled down on hospitality. You know, she cared for those who were sick or the poor, incredibly hospitable, because she just despised anyone who would feel abandoned. So where she was broken, that's actually really where her holiness was. Does that make any sense? So, yeah, everybody's broken in some way. And the amazing part about Christ is that's where the divine can be found. So, like, you have to love broken humanity. And always on the feast of the baptism of the Lord, that's one of the things it reminds me of. And I know that sounds strange, but what is the baptism of the Lord? The baptism of the Lord this gets a little strange, is God wanting today to make a big splash into our crazy human lives, where humanity gathers together, yes, as mixed up as we are. Christ wants to be immersed in that, immersed in the muddy, dysfunctional lives of us. That's where Christ wants to be baptized. Now, the point being is, this is not the sacrament of baptism. Jesus, God, does not need the sacrament of baptism. Christ is the sacrament of baptism. So the baptism of the Lord today, think about this, it's the reverse of baptism. The sacrament of baptism is us being immersed in Christ. So Christ will say, he has a baptism received. He's talking about his death and resurrection. When somebody enters the sacrament of baptism, we're getting immersed in the life and death and resurrection of Christ. The baptism of the Lord today it celebrates, Christ wants to be mixed up with crazy, broken humanity. Christ wants to be immersed in our lives. So it's kind of the reverse. Does that make any sense? So like the deacon, or the guy who wanted to become a deacon, he only wanted to really hang around those people who were perfect. He couldn't really celebrate the baptism of the Lord. Because if you notice in the story of the baptism of the Lord, who doesn't show up? The ones who don't show up are the self-righteous, who think that they're completely perfect. They've just deluded themselves. If they can't even see their own brokenness, all they can do is criticize other people. So they don't show up at the Jordan because they think they're perfect. Christ wants to show up amid the people who realize that they're broken. So that's what the sacrament of baptism celebrates. And when Christ is immersed, today, as he gets immersed in our lives after this, that's when we start studying what's called ordinary time. This is when Christ starts his ministry and all his teaching, and after that, it's training us. And when the voice comes, you hear the voice of the Father say, "This is my beloved Son," and begs us to listen to him, to learn from Christ. So after today, we're just going to be going over the teachings of Christ. And by teachings, I don't really mean learning like academically what Christ taught. Really learning to love the broken, that takes a lot of training. That's what we're going to be doing after this. But today celebrates the beginning of this, that we want to be mixed up with crazy humanity. Or the first reading, when it talks about the coming of the Messiah, he won't be harsh. The Messiah, when he comes, he's not going to be yelling and screaming at humanity. He'll be like a shepherd who gathers the lambs in his arms. Or another place that says, the smoldering wick he will not quench. The broken reed he will not break. I actually like that. Like some people in life, they're a smoldering wick. They're just barely hanging on. Christ is not going to castigate them for their mistakes. The broken, he's not going to bruise them more. I just didn't want the guy to become a deacon until he learned how to fall in love with humanity. And after this feast, this is when we make the promise that we will learn from Christ. We will learn how to love crazy, mixed up humanity. And hopefully Christ being immersed in our life will cause this ripple. We'll see other people in their brokenness. That's where we'll see the divine working in their lives. And so together, let us stand and profess our faith.